In February of 1959, 9 experienced hikers cut their tent open from the inside. They ran barefoot into a -25 degree night. They were all found dead, and the injuries on the mountain is called Kolet-Siakal. In the local Mansi language, the name means dead mountain. The Soviet investigators never managed to find a single explanation that fit all of the evidence. 70 years later, neither has anyone else. File 2. Dyatlov Pass. Tonight on Conspiracy Theory Files, the most over-investigated unsolved death in Soviet history. The criminal case file that closed citing a compelling natural force the hikers could not overcome. January 25, 1959, 10 students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute board a train in the city of Sverdlovsk. Their goal, a 16-day ski expedition to Mount Oterton in the wilderness of the northern Urals. Their leader is 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, an experienced backcountry skier. All 10 are rated to the highest Soviet hiking classification. 2 days in, the youngest member of the group, Yuri Yudin, 21, turns back. Sciatica and a flare of rheumatism in one knee. He passes his diary, his rations, and his return ticket to Igor Dyatlov. He embraces his 9 friends. He will never see any of them alive again. He will live another 54 years, and he will spend most of them in front of a paper map of the Urals, asking the same question. For the next 4 days, they ski through frozen taiga, through abandoned settlements, past empty Mansi reindeer, hunters' camps. They photograph everything. Igor Dyatlov has 2 cameras on this trip. The last clear photograph the group ever takes shows them pitching their tent. The light is bad. The wind is strong. They are 1,100 meters up the slope of Kolet-Siakal on a treeless face, with no obvious shelter from the wind. The decision to camp on the open slope, rather than down in the trees, will become one of the most argued over choices in the history of mountaineering. They pitch the tent. They light a small Primus stove inside. They eat. The shared diary's final clean entry is a joke, a fake evening newspaper page with humorous headlines and a satirical weather. February 1st, 1959, the last entry. By dawn, they are expected nowhere in particular. The plan is to keep moving for another 2 weeks, so nobody worries. Not in mid-February, not in late February. Their families are the first to worry. The rescue is not organized until February 20th, 19 days after the last diary entry. By then, it is already too late. February 26th, the first search party finds the tent. The tent is still there. The poles are still upright on the uphill side. Most of their gear is still inside. Boots, skis, the cameras, the shared diary, the small Primus stove, their warm overcoats, their bread. 3 pairs of Valenki, heavy Russian felt winter boots, sit in the snow at the doorway as if they were stepped out of a single second ago, and the downhill face of the tent has been sliced open from the inside. This becomes the single most important physical fact of the entire case. Forensic investigators examined the canvas. They tested the direction of the cut. The conclusion was unambiguous. The canvas had been sliced from inside the tent by someone using a knife on the inner face. Whoever cut it was already in panic. The cut was not neat. It was not careful. It was the cut of a person trying very urgently to get out. Cut from the inside by somebody in a hurry. Down the slope, the rescuers find footprints. 8 or 9 sets, they lead away from the cut tent downhill in a fan for about 1.5 kilometers. Toward the tree line. Several of the prints are barefoot. Several of the socks. A few show a single boot. The investigators measure the spacing. The footprints are not those of people running. They are the spacing of people walking quickly but not in flight. Whatever drove them out of the tent, by the time they reached this slope, they were moving with discipline. What the search party found next is where the case stops behaving like a normal mountain accident. About 1.5 kilometers down the slope at the very edge of the tree line, the searchers find a large old cedar tree. The snow around it is heavily disturbed. Several branches on the lower trunk have been broken off. The bark on the lower trunk has been scraped raw, as if somebody had been climbing it. Beneath the tree, in the snow, are the remains of a small fire. Beneath the cedar, partly covered by snow, are 2 of the missing hikers. Yuri Krivonoshchenko, Yuri Dorothenko, both wearing only their underwear, both showing the signs of hypothermia, both with burned hands. The investigators conclude that they had climbed the tree, broken branches for the fire, lit it, and then either died or moved on. The two bodies are taken away. The mountain returns to silence. Between the cedar tree and the abandoned tent, the searchers find three more. Igor Dyatlov, the leader, Zenaida Kolmogorova, Rustam Slobodin. All three appear to have been trying to climb back up the slope toward the camp when they died. All three show injuries consistent with falls in the dark. All three are wearing more clothes than the two at the cedar tree, but still not enough for the cold. The Soviet medical examiner gives all five the same official cause, hypothermia. By the end of March, the search has recovered 5 bodies. 4 are still missing. The remaining 4 will not be found for another 2 months, and when they are found, the case will change entirely. May 4th, 1959. The snow begins to melt. In a narrow ravine cut into the side of the slope, about 75 meters past the cedar tree, the searchers find a deep cavity in the snow. Inside the cavity, lying in the bottom of the ravine, are the last 4 hikers. Their bodies have been preserved by the cold, and their injuries are not consistent with hypothermia. The forensic examiner's report on the final 4 is the document that has kept this case alive for 67 years. Lyudmila Dubinia, massive chest fractures consistent with, and these are the examiner's words, the impact of a moving automobile. Semyon Zolotaryov, multiple rib fractures of the same kind. Nikolai Thibault, Brignol's, a fractured skull. Alexander Kolovatov, no major skeletal trauma but signs of hypothermia. The examiner's exact phrase in the original Russian is as if they had been hit by a car, and on a frozen ravine in the northern Urals in 1959, there were no cars. There was nothing for any of them to fall from. The drop into the ravine itself is not nearly far enough to produce those injuries. The Soviet investigators write a single line in the file. The cause of these injuries cannot be determined. As if they had been hit by a car. 2 of the bodies in the ravine are missing their eyes. One of them is also missing the tongue. The Soviet forensic team attributes this to small scavengers and to weeks of flowing meltwater. 2 of the 4 bodies in the ravine, Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov, are wearing clothing that registers an abnormal level of radioactive beta contamination, not lethal, not even dangerous to a wearer over a short period, but measurably above the background level for the northern Urals in 1959. The Soviet investigation files the result. It does not propose a source. The question of where this radiation came from has been open for 67 years. On the same nights the Dyatlov group was on the mountain, other expeditions in the region, a meteorological team near IVD, a separate group of hikers 30 kilometers away, reported strange orange spheres in the night sky, slow, moving, soundless. Burning above the ridge, their reports are in the criminal case file. The Soviet investigators flag them. The investigators do not explain them. What was in the sky that night? The Soviet inquest closes in June of 1959. The case files final classification cause of death. The elemental force of nature. The case is sealed. The files are classified. For 60 years, what the public knew came from leaks, from the families of the dead, from the 4-volume case file that researchers slowly pieced together through Soviet-era archives, from the photographs, many of them developed from the recovered cameras, and from one survivor, Yuri Yudin, who turned back from sciatica and who spent the rest of his life going through the files with anyone who asked. Yuri Yudin died in 2013. He was 75. In his last interview, asked which theory of the deaths he found most convincing, he answered, "I do not know. I have read every file that exists, and I still do not know." In 2019, the Russian Prosecutor General's office formally reopened the case. The reopening is widely viewed inside Russia as a public relations gesture. Most of the original investigators are dead. Most of the evidence has been destroyed. There are, at last count, 63 competing theories for what killed the Dyatlov group. Most can be dismissed in a sentence. 5 cannot. Here are the 5. Theory 1. A small delayed slab avalanche. In 2021, 2 researchers, Johann Gaum of Lausanne and Alexander Puzrin of Zurich, published a computational paper in Nature. The avalanche theory is now the closest thing to a scientific consensus the case has ever had. It is also incomplete. It does not explain the radioactive clothing. It does not explain the orange spheres reported by other expeditions on the same nights. It does not fully explain why some of the group was found facing back up the slope, in the direction of the camp. The theory is the strongest single answer we have. It is not, by itself, all of the answers. Theory 2. A katabatic wind event. In 2013, the writer Donny Iker proposed that a rare meteorological pattern, a vortex of high-speed cold air shed off the ridge above the camp, could have produced a low-frequency infrasound resonance inside the tent. Infrasound at certain frequencies is known to trigger panic, disorientation, and a sense of dread in human beings. The theory, the group, in irrational terror, cuts the tent from inside, runs into the dark, and dies of cold before the wind passes. This theory also explains a great deal. It does not explain the chest injuries. It does not explain why so many of the bodies were found wearing clothes taken from members who had died earlier, implying that the Theory 3, a Soviet weapons test. The Plesetsk Cosmodrome, one of the Soviet Union's primary ballistic missile launch sites, is northwest of the pass. Other Soviet test ranges are scattered through the Urals. The orange spheres reported by other expeditions on the same nights are consistent with rocket exhaust, seen at distance, or with parachute, deployed atmospheric test devices. The radioactive contamination on Dubinina's and Zolotaryov's clothing is consistent with, among other things, a fissile or thorium, bearing test of the period. The Soviet government, in the late 1950s, was running a great many tests. Many of those test programs remain classified today. If the deaths of 9 civilians on a remote ridge had been caused by a military test, accidentally, at night, with no witnesses, and the Soviet investigators had pieced this together, the case would have closed exactly as it did, with a 4-word phrase and a sealed file. The weapons test theory is the favorite of researchers inside Russia. It is also the hardest to prove. The relevant Soviet test records, if they exist, have never been released, and it does not, by itself. Xperi 4 was the first one the Soviet investigators tried. The Mansi, the indigenous people of the northern Urals, were initially suspected of having attacked the group, perhaps for trespassing on a sacred mountain. The investigators interviewed the Mansi families in the region thoroughly. No evidence of any conflict was found. The Mansi had been at peace with the hiking expeditions for decades. No additional footprints were found around the tent, only the 9 sets that fanned downhill. The theory was dismissed within weeks. Theory 5 is the paranormal stack, a yeti, an interdimensional being, an entity of Mansi folklore that does not welcome strangers on the mountain. The Yeti claim hinges on a single blurred frame from one of Theory 5 is a blurry photograph of one of their own friends. We can move on. The most defensible explanation taken across all the evidence is some combination, a small slab avalanche that crushed several sleepers and panicked the rest, an evacuation in haste, in the dark, with what clothes could be grabbed, a long downhill walk in temperatures of -25 degrees Celsius. Hypothermia for some falls into the ravine for the others, and possibly separately, the bad luck to be on the same mountain on a night. The Soviet military was firing something they have not, in 67 years, admitted to firing. Avalanche, plus the night sky. What we still don't know. Number 1. The missing eyes. The Soviet examiner attributed them to scavengers and meltwater. Most modern pathologists agree. Most. There are 2 who do not. Their dissenting opinions are in the case file. The question of whether the tissue loss happened post-mortem by ordinary biological causes or for some other reason was never resolved. Number 2. The radiation. 67 years later, we still do not know what put detectable beta, emitting contamination on the inside of 2 specific hikers' sweaters. We have candidates, Soviet weapons tests, naturally radioactive soil from Mansi territory, atmospheric fallout from earlier atmospheric tests, but no answer. Number 3. The orange spheres, reported by other expeditions on the same nights, documented in the Soviet case file, never explained, never repeated under conditions anyone could verify. They are perhaps the most mundane part of the case, and yet the part that, decades later, refuses to fit any of the official theories. Number 4. Lyudmila Dubinina's missing tongue, almost certainly mortem tissue loss in flowing meltwater. Almost, the pathology report does not rule out an antemortem cause. The pathology report does not rule it in. Like everything else in this case, the official answer is, we cannot say. Number 5. The last frame on the recovered cameras. It shows what appears to be a bright light source above the slope. It is dim. It is grainy. It has been digitally analyzed dozens of times. It has been identified as a flare, a meteor, a parachute mine, the moon refracted through cloud, lens flare from the camera, an aurora, and an unidentified flying object. Pick a theory, the photograph supports all of them. 9 people, 67 years. 5 questions that still do not have clean answers. The pass is now formally named Dyatlov Pass. There is a memorial stone. There are pine boughs left by hikers most years. There is a single named flower laid by Yuri Yudin's family each winter. In his last interview in 2013, Yuri Yudin was asked one more time which theory he believed. He paused. He said, "I do not know, but I know it was not the cold. The cold was not the first thing to come for them. He died 11 months later. The cold was not the first thing." Whatever drove them out of that tent on the night of February 1st, 1959, it scared them badly enough that they preferred a long walk into a -20. 5-degree night in their socks to staying inside one. They cut the wall and they ran. Tomorrow morning the pass will look exactly like this. The day after, the week after, the mountain has more time than we do. It has more time than the investigators did, and it has more time than the families have. Whatever it knows, it is going to know it for a great deal longer than we are going to be around to ask. The case is, in 2026, formally closed. Officially, a slab-avalanche, paradoxical undressing, hypothermia. The files have been published, the simulations have been run, the dead have been mourned, the mountain is silent. The questions, on the days the wind is not blowing hard, are still there waiting. If you want to read more, start with 2 sources. Donny Icar's book, Dead Mountain, from 2013, the cleanest English language summary of the Soviet case file, and the Gorm Puzrun paper in Nature, from 2021, the avalanche simulation that, for the first time in 60 years, made the physical injuries make sense. Both are in the description below. And on the question of what was in the sky that night, on the question of why 2 pieces of clothing in a ravine in 1950, 9 were measurably radioactive. On the question of who, or what, the survivors saw in the long minutes between cutting the tent and freezing in the snow. The file is open. The witnesses are dead. The mountain is silent. We are the ones who are still asking. Officially closed. Still asking. Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Yuri Krivonishchenko, Yuri Dorothenko, Rustam Slobodin, Nikolai Thibault, Brignoz, Alexander Kolovatov, Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotriov, 23, 22, 24, 21, 23, 23, 24, 20, 38. 9 names. They are still missing some answers. If you want the next file, subscribe. This is File 2. Dyatlov Pass. The questions are with us. The answers, most of them, are not. And the case, in any way that matters, will be open as long as anyone still cares to ask. Some files don't close. Next week, a book 600 years old, written in a language no human has ever been able to read, full of plants that do not exist on this planet, and full of women bathing in green water in tubes that have never... File 3, the Voynich manuscript, next week.